Your people are gifted to be in United States, born in United States. You have freedom to choose atheism or religion, but in India it is very difficult. If you start a call-in studio for atheism, people will no, religious people will vandalize and destroy the studio.
I have no idea, Paul. You catching any of that?
So what I've heard so far was that he said because we were born in America, which I'm not, but that's close enough. I'm Canada, so it's close enough that we are able to have a call-in show like this, and we have the freedom to discuss atheism. I believe Sura is trying to say that in his country, if they were to start a call-in show, the studio would be attacked. That he lives in such a place that he doesn't have the freedom to do that. I don't know if that's the case or not, and I don't know what the follow-up would be, but that's what I've gleaned so far. Is that correct, Sura?
Yes, yes.
So were you calling to, did you have a question or beyond the observation?
No, do you have any plans to start a studio in India?
Well, apparently we'll be killed, according to you, or imprisoned or something. So, I mean, that's. Hang on just a second, though. If I can comment, I'm looking at the description on the call-in studio switchboard. It says atheism is impossible in India. I'm guessing what you meant is you believe that being a public atheist activist, wearing it on your sleeves, could be dangerous. And again, I'm with Paul. I don't know that. But I will say that atheism is extremely possible in India because whether or not you believe in God happens under your skin. It is a product of your own mind, your own belief system. And they're in high control, theocratic Islamic nations are a great example. There's an underground. A ton of people who don't believe in Allah, they are atheists, even if they cannot wear it on their sleeves. So no one can enslave your mind like that. And in that way, you can remain free. And it's my hope the culture itself will soon follow. Okay?
Okay, but you talk about many bad things about Jesus, right? But if you talk about Hindu gods, even a little bit of bad things, any positive criticism also is not acceptable for those religious people. So it is. No, I don't know how
One thing
to.
one thing from my Christian upbringing and the path that I thought my life was on for most of my life was that I believed that missionary journeys were good. That North Americans trying to learn another culture and then going to that culture to try to preach Jesus was a good way of spreading things. Now it turns out, in retrospect, that is actually not a great way to reach people. It's a very expensive way to do it, and it doesn't gain much traction. Because of course the cultural divide, as you rightly say, the cultural differences are great. So Seth and I could fly to India, next month and start a show, but we know next to nothing about the kind of arguments that are made at a popular level. I couldn't name more than two or three Hindu gods. I just wouldn't be able to argue effectively, even if I had a great translator. It's just not where we're at, and it's part of the reason why I try and stay in my lane with Christianity. And people say, "Well, hey, why don't you talk about Islam more, other religions more?" I'm like, "Well, because I am uniquely qualified because I came out of Christianity to talk about Christianity." So I feel like um, the best course. I empathize with you, but I'm guessing that outsiders like Seth and I starting a call-in show in India probably would have very little traction because they would write us off as outsiders who don't know about anything. So what I hope for you and for your culture, your country, is that slowly over time and hopefully quickly over time, people like yourself from the culture will be able to have more and more freedom and more boldness to say that you're an atheist. In Seth and my lifetimes, saying an atheist when we were children would have probably got us beat up as well. At least in where I lived, it definitely would have. So I guess I'm not convinced that you need outside help. What we will hope for you, and I think, I hope atheists around the world would support you, is to do your own local thing and get that grassroots thing going. That's a bit of a anti-missionary tangent that I went on there for a bit. But Seth, did you have anything to add?
I think you covered it, my friend. Sura, anything else before we move on?
No, I feel that there is something mystery in India that is making people follow religion very deeply. So I feel that there is something divine in India that's why we don't have any. The percentage of atheism is less than 1%.
We have a
What
lot
is
of
your opinion on that?
religiosity. We have religiosity in nations all over the world. Would that imply something divine is going on?
No, but in India, atheism is just below 1%.
Well, atheism, yes. In fact, I've pulled up some information I'm going to read cold, but it comes from the Associated Press, and we'll see if we can give ourselves and everybody a kind of a primer on this because you've got me curious. Sura, you are much appreciated. Thanks for calling, and be safe and well, okay?
Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. Sorry about the quality of that call. This is from the Associated Press, India, published October 5th of last year. Non-religious struggle to find their voice and place in Indian society and politics. Just a couple of paragraphs for grins. Despite India's millennia old history of non religious movements, most atheists and rationalists choose to keep quiet about their skepticism of faith. It's easier and far less risky than going public in one of the world's most religious countries. The space that does exist for debating religious authority and belief is shrinking, said Avinash Patel, a religious skeptic who was born Hindu and is now a leader of an anti superstition group working in one of the country's western states. He blames the growth of nationwide religious and communal tensions over the last decade, as well as rising Hindu nationalism under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership. So apparently, Sura is telling us the truth. It is a very religious nation. It is difficult to be irreligious, at least publicly. I don't know about endangerment. I'm not familiar enough with it to be able to comment on whether or not we were to start a broadcast or go public or hold a placard on a city street and fear for our safety. So I can't speak to that. I don't know. Any other thoughts, Paul, before I move on?
No.
You mentioned Canada again. I just have to digress. I saw a somebody wore a t-shirt one. There are two competing t-shirts about the US and Canada that made me laugh. And I think you and I should buy one and wear one, maybe at a party. Um, the American version says Canada, America's hat. And the Canadian's wearing a t-shirt that says America, Canada's ass. And I know the US is not America, but that's just colloquially how we talk about it. But it's not,
Indeed.
we're Canada's ass. We're the ass end of Canada, apparently, down here. So, we do, I think, forget how spoiled we are. I did a whole show 3 years ago about how it's not that we don't have legitimate difficulties. It's not that there aren't people in danger. It's not that we don't have problems with homelessness and poverty and sickness and all education, all these other issues. But sometimes I think in developed nations, we become myopic and we forget really how good we have it. Even our worst is often better than the best that others are having in high control, highly oppressed nations all around the world. And we forget how bad many of our ancestors had it. I'm releasing a speech to YouTube about intelligent design, and we're talking about how just a few hundred years ago, tooth abscesses were the sixth leading cause of death. I mean, it's unheard of in developed nations now that you would die of that. Back then, delivering a baby, good chance you wouldn't survive or the baby wouldn't
Hmm.
survive. Um, we didn't know what germs were. We didn't know where diseases came from. We hadn't mapped the genome. Air travel when it was just a fantasy. All of these things that we often take for granted. And it's true, I think, that we in developed nations sometimes, while we're busy whining about how oppressed we are, and we have legitimate problems, we loom under the shadow of Christian nationalists and all those types of things. But we also, I think, have to remember that in many ways, I'm paying an extra $3 or $5 for a dozen eggs. Somebody
Hmm.
else doesn't have anything to eat and may starve to death today. And I know it sounds like hyperbole. Paul, do you want to weigh in on any of that? Do you have any thoughts? I would welcome them if you do.
Uh, just on our general luck. No, I mean, but I do. I mean, obviously, I do think about that often with my content. Is that like you have to actually have some freedom and some safety, food safety, all these things for the stuff that I talk about to even be a consideration in your life. I know that obviously when you're the poor and the destitute will often cry out to God, but they're not thinking about whether the cosmological argument is a good reason for them to think God will pull them up out of their circumstances. So I get that privilege for sure, and I do kind of want to reiterate though that even 1950s, 1960s, to be a vocal atheist, well, you weren't going to get injured in Western society here, but you would have that would have eliminated you from running for office, for example, or that would have eliminated you from a lot of jobs. You would have been select. There would have been consequences to making those kind of declarations. That, frankly, I'm appreciative that in the time where I became an atheist, those are not my consequences. But just to encourage, those in other countries that are behind that curve, it is possible that the society will catch up and help that way. So we're looking for the Star Trek future, not the Dune future.
I think there are some states in my country that still have laws on the books. They're like the blue laws in some cases that are largely ignored. But I think there are some places where it is still illegal for an atheist to
Mm.
run for office. I know that discrimination often happens between the letters of the law. So it's like saying, well, racism is solved because we have anti discrimination policies and laws in place. But that's not how racism works. Like somebody who's a racist says, well, I fired that person because of poor communication skills. But the truth was, they were fired because of the color of their skin. And that's how discrimination often works. There was a study that came out 15 years ago where, at the time, it said that the American public trusted atheists less than they would trust rapists. And I think that may have shifted. I think finally we are above rapist rather in the hierarchy. I don't know. I,
Woo!
I do know that we are seeing some secular political candidates, humanist political candidates, non-religious political candidates begin to get noticed on the American radar. That may signify a sea change. Um, I don't know, my friend. I think it's chess, not checkers. So I do have high hopes that at the grassroots level, what we're thinking, feeling, doing, believing, and not believing will be reflected in the leaders that we elect in the coming years and decades.